Hello, everyone. Happy Wednesday. Happy January. Welcome. We are so excited to see you all here, and we have a fabulous guest speaker in store as we dig into storytelling today. A couple of announcements and some housekeeping pieces. I know we are on Zoom and it is classic Brady Bunch boxes, but we would love to see your face. We'd love to see who we're talking to and who we're sharing this time with. So if you can, please turn your camera on. Also, there will be some time for interaction. So be ready to unmute if at any point as we go through this, share ideas or questions in the chat. We want you to feel like you're getting as much out of this time together as possible. So don't be afraid to use the chat, or when we get to it, some Q&A, unmute, and we can have a great conversation. Couple of announcements on behalf of our Small Giants team. Just some things to have on your radar. If you are not already familiar with it, our summit, our annual summit is here. It is 2025. We no longer have to say next year our summit is coming. It is in a couple of months in Detroit from April 29th through May 1st. So we highly encourage you to get your tickets while they are still available. We would love to hang out with you in real life and get to do this without the virtual boxes. So we hope you can join us. Heidi shared some information in the chat, so you can go and check it out. And then another thing we have, that if you are looking for some help and some aligned support to kind of guide you on your path and figure out those 2025 New Year's resolutions and goals, we invite you to consider Sounding Board. Sounding Board is our mentorship program where we pair you one-on-one with a Small Giants mentor to really help you navigate what is most top of mind and kind of where you're going. So if that is something that is of interest, we're happy to have a conversation and tell you more about it. Also, just kind of evaluate, is that the right fit for what you need and what you're going through? So you can always check that out as well, and just shoot us a DM if you're interested in talking more. So with that, I'm going to pass it on over to Bridget on our team for an introduction.
Thanks, Katie. Well, I'm excited to introduce Kristin. We're super excited to have her and help us learn how to best use storytelling in our purpose-driven businesses to get the support for our companies. Kristin is the Chief Storytelling Officer at StoryFind. She's also an award-winning storyteller, a licensed professional counselor, and a speaker and author. So we're excited to get to hear from you and learn from you, Kristin. And with that, the floor is yours.
Well, yay. Thanks, Bridget. I'm so excited to be here with you all today. Let me get my screen shared and then we will just dive right in. Share. There we go. Okay, well, thank you for joining me today. I am just so excited to talk with you all about one of my all-time favorite things, which is finding your organization's most impactful stories. Because it does matter, right? Anyone can find a story to tell, but the key for today is really, how do you find the right one? And what does the right one even really mean? So that's what we're going to explore together today. And I want to make this really practical. I want you to walk away from here saying, I know how to do this, and I can take it back to my organization and use it or teach someone else to use it, because it doesn't matter if you're here if you can't take and apply it. So let's look together at an overview of the day. Ah, there's me smiling at you. One time I did one of these and I was wearing that same sweater and it was really embarrassing. So I'm glad to not be in my blue today. But we're going to do three things together today. We're going to talk about the power of story, just kind of reignite our passion around that. We are going to lay a really solid foundation for great storytelling through the creation of a messaging strategy together. And then we are going to go on what I like to call a story hunt. So let's just dive right in and talk about the power of story. I'm clicking, but my slides aren't going. There we go. Okay, so the power of story. I think it always serves as a good reminder that storytelling is critically important and should not be an afterthought in your marketing strategy. So I want to start today by just talking through a few statistics that really emphasize why what we're talking about today is so critically important for our organizations. So, studies from Stanford Graduate School of Business indicate that stories are remembered up to 22 times better than simple facts. So, that's huge. Storytelling can enhance product perception by, I'm going to try to remember this exactly, 2,706%. And I'll tell you a story about this one in a minute. Around 68% of consumers state that brand stories influence their purchasing decisions, which is a huge number. And finally, 92%, 92%, even bigger, this is the biggest number yet, of people prefer ads presented as a narrative. So I think we can all agree that storytelling for our organizations is a really big deal. And if you want to move someone to act, what do? You tell a story. So let's pause for a minute, and I want to just talk about what a story is not. So a story is not your mission statement. A story is not a collection of facts or data or a statement about your organization's needs or successes. It's not the three things that your organization does that are unique. Those are not stories. Rather, a story is a narrative that conveys events, experiences, or ideas through a structured format, like a story arc or a story flow. They contain characters, they contain a setting, a plot. They're used to communicate ideas and emotions or truths. And one of the reasons that they are such a powerful tool is that they require an audience to have imagination and empathy, or essentially, they require an audience to engage with you in the hearing of a story. You can tune out a fact, but you can't tune out a story as easily. So, stories heal, they unite, they inspire, they create change, they inform, and they are literally the oldest business strategy in the book. So, let's start our time together with me telling you a story. There was a journalist, maybe some of you have heard this one. His name was Rob Walker, and he wanted to determine whether storytelling was the most effective resource out there. So he set out and devised a plan where he went to a thrift store and he purchased small items at the average cost of about $1.25 per item, which came out to be about $129 for the lot in the end after he'd bought everything. And he went home and he decided to hire amazing copywriters to give each of these items a backstory. He then posted the same thrifted items on eBay and he resold each of them with a story attached to them for nearly $8,000. So in the end, he made $7,871 simply from storytelling about thrifted items. And the same is going to be true for you and your work. So in a world where people are increasingly drawn to brands and organizations with stories that resonate on a human level, storytelling offers this powerful way to really convey your identity and engage your audience and show your connection to the community. And ultimately, the goal, of course, is to drive action, right? So my hope for you today is to send you out of this webinar being able to successfully find your best stories, because just because someone has a story to tell and that story is about your brand, that does not mean that it's the right story for your brand. And that's what I really, really want to focus on with you today. So let's get into it. To lay the foundation, I want to introduce you to my friend Rita. She was a student at Concordia College, which is in Selma, Alabama, and she really bravely shared her life story with me and my team over the course of 2 hours, with the end result being this 2-minute video that I'm about to show you. Now, this this one isn't a brand story per se, but the same principles really apply, and so do the results. So this was a project for the school's foundation, which they hired us to help raise money so that they could keep serving students like Rita, essentially, at the end of the day, that they could keep doing more of the work that they loved doing. I am going to reference back to Rita throughout all of our time together today, so I want to show you her video first, and then we'll dive into the specifics of how you can find your own Ritas, your people who are willing to share their story on behalf of your brand's larger story, essentially. So let me stop sharing my screen. I'm going to reshare a new screen with the video, and we'll pray that that works. And give me a minute. Okay, here we go.
I remember when I was in high school and we got ready to graduate. And I went to my counselor, and she told me that I was not college material. And she said that I should take a job at the factory because I should not apply to any colleges because I would not make it. I believed her. Dr. McNair Ramsey, he was the pastor at Emmanuel Lutheran Church. And he said, hey, he said, are you in college? And I said, no, sir, I never even thought about college. He said, you ever heard of Concordia? No. And he said, we're going to bring some teachers. He said, would you be interested if we brought some teachers to the church to have some classes like during the week or whatever? Sure. That's how I got interested in what education really was all about. You know, it wasn't just about books and stuff. It was about somebody caring enough and then seeing something in you and wanted you to be your best. Dr. Ramsey has been with me since the beginning. I remember when I started back to school, doing my last 2 years, a few years ago, he had gotten really, really sick. And I said, I'm back in school. And he said, you know what, if it's God's will, I'll be at your graduation. And he was there. He was the first face that I saw when I walked through those doors. I can look at the kids in my classroom and tell them, it does not matter where you started. It does not matter. That does not have to be where you end up. But that's what I've learned from coming to Concordia. I did not believe in myself. Not until I started here. And I want to instill that in somebody else's child.
Okay, that was Rita. Let me hop really quick back into my PowerPoint. All right.
I remember when I was in high school and we got ready to graduate.
There we go. I don't ever play the embedded one because it stutters all over the place. So it was playing itself. So Rita, her bravery really in telling her story meant that the college could highlight its mission and demonstrate its friendliness to adult learners, show the type of student that the college might appeal to without ever explicitly saying those things. So story could convey that without ever having to say it explicitly. And before we get into finding your own Ritas, I just want to highlight the importance of story one last time, using Rita as an example. So storytelling is collaborative. And this is one of the things that gives it its superpower. Kendra Hall, many of you might have heard of her. She's the author of a book called Stories That Stick. She talks about how telling stories really takes at least two people. It takes the person telling the story, so there's Rita telling her story out into the world, but it also takes an audience to receive that story. So let's talk about this together and our own responses to Rita. Rita talked about how when she went to her high school guidance counselor's office, that woman told her that she was not college material. How many of you can relate to being told maybe you're not quite good enough? I know I can. Maybe someone's told you at some point in your life that you're just not quite up to snuff. So, as Rita is sharing her story, we, as the audience, are overlaying our own meaning and our own shared experiences onto her story. And it becomes this really beautiful collaborative thing. We become part of her story. And subconsciously, we become invested in the Concordia College story as well. The other piece of what makes stories so powerful is how our minds create imagery to pair with the story. And this is the other piece of the collaboration in storytelling. So, Rita talked about how she was told to get a job at the sewing factory. We didn't see a sewing factory, but how many of you, even just saying sewing factory, can start to see one in your minds? Isn't that kind of cool? We start to create imagery around the story we're experiencing. So maybe some of you saw the inside of what a sewing factory might look like, where she might have ended up working. Maybe you saw the outside of it. Maybe it's a big brick building. Maybe it's old, even though the actual sewing factory is new. But as we create images that pair with the words of our storytellers, we allow ourselves to become an active part of creating their worlds within our own minds. And so, as you share your organization's stories, your audiences become actively involved as receivers of the stories. So, they overlay their own meaning on top of the stories that you're telling, and they actively participate in the storytelling process through the creation of their own visual worlds. And that's really, really cool. And then here's the key though. At the end of the day, we ask our audiences to do something as a result of what they just experienced. So we invite them to become part of our brand's story with us, or to become part of your nonprofit's mission if you're a nonprofit. They are already personally invested. Their story is already intertwined with your storytellers, and they're ready to join you as part of your mission. Okay, so let's workshop a little bit. How do you find storytellers like Rita? Because there really is an art form that goes into finding the right voices for your organization. It's not luck. We didn't just show up on campus and find Rita as a random student and sit her down and have her tell us a great story. There was a lot more that went behind it. So my book, it's called StoryFind. It outlines the process of storytelling from beginning to end. But for today, I want to highlight one little section of it, which is how to actually find people to tell your stories. That's one of the biggest challenges I encounter with the people that we work with on a day-to-day basis. So there we go. Step one, it all starts with the basics. Every time you are going to share a story with the world, you want to start with the creation of a messaging strategy first. We call our messaging strategies at StoryFind our master plans, and each master plan will ask you to answer 4 mission critical questions. I also just want to pause and say, this is probably our most beloved tool, and our clients have hailed it as an organizational game changer because it gives your stories purpose. Every single time you start out on an initiative to tell a story, this is where you should start. Storytelling is time consuming if you're doing it right. And you want to make sure that if you're looking for stories, that the stories you find will actually perform for your organization, that they'll actually connect with your audience. Just because someone has a story to tell does not mean it's the right story for your brand. So start with a plan before you search for your storytellers. It might sound obvious, but you need to know what you're looking for. I cannot emphasize that enough. So your master plan is going to contain 4 mission critical questions, and let's look at each one of those together. First up, what are your goals for the story that you're telling? What do you hope to accomplish? Why do you need to find a storyteller? When you set out to tell a story, you are going to tell the story that's actually going to drive your audience to do something at the end of the day. So figure out what your goals are with the story that you're telling. Do you want to sell more of a specific item? Do you want to create general feelings of goodwill towards your organization? Do you want to leverage social proof, boost SEO, visibility? If you're a nonprofit, do you need to raise more money, recruit volunteers, trying to think of other goals I hear on a regular basis. Just increase public awareness on an issue. At the end of the day, think about what you want to accomplish before you set out to look for a storyteller. What are your goals? That's number one. Number two, how will you define success? This second one is something that everyone skips over because it can seem a little bit ambiguous, but you want to know at the end of the day that the story you told was successful, right? How will you know that? How will you know if you actually accomplished your goal? This is the biggest thing I see with organizations when they just give up on storytelling. It's because they haven't known how to define success. So they're like, well, I told a story. I'm not sure if it did anything for us. Figure out upfront how you're going to measure it. Over time, of course, you want to make sure that your resources are being spent in the most effective way possible, right? So make sure if you set a goal, you'll be able to determine whether or not you're actually reaching that goal. So those are my first two baseline questions for what you need to lay out before you set out to find a storyteller. The third one is, who is your audience? Know your audience before you go out and find a storyteller that you just hope will connect with them. So we have an entire worksheet that we do on audience discovery. I trust that you all are doing this work as well. But in essence, who are they? What are they like? What are they responding to when you put stories out? Are there ones that they're not responding to? Spend some time researching what has received a positive reaction for you and what hasn't. A/B test your stories. It takes time, but it will produce enormous results if you can determine what is working and what isn't and why. And last but not least, this is actually one of my favorite things to talk about. If you take nothing else away from the messaging strategy and finding your stories, I want what you remember to be this. Every story that you tell needs to contain one and only one big idea. You literally have one shot to make your audience remember one thing about who you are and what you do. So we work with a lot of organizations who have multiple departments, and I'm sure this is the same for a lot of you. Sometimes they'll set out to do a storytelling campaign, and maybe you've signed off on a storytelling initiative, maybe they've signed off on a storytelling initiative, and you start to have people approaching you saying, "Hey, I heard you were doing a video, or I heard you were telling a story. Can you mention my program too? Can you just mention all 5 of our sales offerings? Can you give nod to this program or that program?" And you will end up exhausted trying to include it all. And ultimately, if you approach storytelling this way, you will end up making what I like to call a pot of stew. It's sort of like an indescribable nothingness at the end of the day. Maybe it's good, maybe it's not good. But the one thing it's sure to be is so cluttered by so many voices that your audience will disregard it to shut off the noise. So, quick story break. One time we were working with an organization in the heart of New York City, and we had this wonderful marketing director who we were working with. She was fantastic, and we worked to fill out our master plan together. We had our one big idea in place, and we showed up. And this was a video story. So we actually filmed some lovely interviews with their storytellers. And then halfway through post-production, our champion marketing director decided to take a job with another organization. And we were left, oh, it actually almost makes me cry even now. This was like 3 years ago, and I'm still feeling the like waves of emotion from it. We were left with our new point people, which was a team of 9 department heads who all decided that they wanted to have a voice in the editing process. They wanted to give their input, right? Can you relate to this? We had, I kid you not, 92 comments on our first round of edits. Most of them actually contradicted each other, and everyone was fighting to have the pieces that would serve their own initiatives in the final product. It was truly a comments pot of stew. No one was talking to each other. They were all just like talking at us, at my team. But here's what got us back on the same page. We had a master plan in place, and this plan was decided upon ahead of time. We were able to come together and say, I know that what you're all doing is also really important, but our one big idea for this campaign is X. I'm going to say X. I'm not going to say what it was because I feel like some of you might know who they are. So I'm not going to even say what their one big idea was. But by being able to say we had one big idea in place where we conducted all the interviews around this idea too, we could emphasize that we weren't talking about a specific program or we weren't talking about their products in this piece. We were sharing a big idea. The plan was laid out in black and white. It had been signed off on, and we could communicate the importance of keeping everything on track with that master plan, even with our marketing director having departed. So let's talk about Rita's story again too, because most of it ended up on the cutting room floor. Her actual interview, I think, was about 2 hours long. Her life story is truly incredible. Many pieces of her story would have been captivating to the school's audience. For example, just painting a picture of her childhood even. I remember she didn't have running water in her house growing up, and her family utilized an outhouse in their backyard. But we had essentially 2 minutes to tell their audience a story. So what you saw in the video was just a fraction of the story. And what you saw was the most important pieces that would serve this master plan. And all of it was based around a one big idea that was decided upon before we ever arrived to film. Rita's one big idea was education changes lives. That was it. One big idea is they are simple, they're clear, incredibly focused. Education changes lives. That was it. Not our adult learning program. It has these 5 different components you should give to each one of them. It was just super simple, high level, not mixed in with a list of things that you do or sell. Your audience can always get that from your website, but your stories need to convey a bigger picture. One final key note here is define your big ideas before you set out to find a storyteller that can support them. Then, when you go out to find your storytellers, look for ones that can support those big ideas that you want to communicate. Okay. So your master plan really is your foundation for great storytelling. I saw a question come in ahead of time about storytelling on LinkedIn, and I would love to talk about that right at the end because a master plan for LinkedIn is just as critical as a master plan for a storytelling initiative that you're sending out to your audiences in mass. The goal, you want to have a goal. You want to know your audience and see what they're responding to, and every post that you put out there should have one big idea. No more, no less. One big idea that people can respond to. Okay, I'm getting off track, and I could answer that question for 10 minutes. I'll keep on track here. Once your master plan is in place, you can actually talk about, how to find your amazing storytellers. So plan first, find second. Next up, you're going to go on a story hunt where you'll do 3 different things. Let me click those on. You're going to make a list, conduct discovery interviews, and then select your storytellers. Each one of these things is really systematic as well, so I want to break down each one together. Think about this as you get started. How do you find your storytellers now? Is it easy? Is it hard? Are you the one that's connected to them? Is it someone else in your organization? And also, how do you determine who is a good storyteller? That's something I want you to think about as well. So as you start to build your list of potential storytellers, you might need to rally your team to help. I think it's really important to make sure that you clearly communicate 2 things to the people who are helping you find your stories. Your master plan, that's number 1. You always want to make sure people have that master plan in front of you, in front of them if they're helping you find your storytellers. And then You want to arm them with the following criteria. Let me click these up. When creating a list of potential storytellers, this is what I want you to look for every single time. First, look for people who trust you and your organization. This is critically important. You have to find storytellers who deeply trust you and who believe that you'll take great care of them and their story at the end of the day. This is not just the case for hard stories, by the way. This is the case for anyone. They need to trust you and you need to trust them as well. Next, look for people who can demonstrate vulnerability. The struggle is the story. I know that that can be uncomfortable to hear, but it's true. They have to be wrestling to overcome something that your brand helped them solve. Again, this does not have to be like Rita, where they're experiencing deep emotion, but you have to have helped them solve something. What was life like for them without your brand? Essentially, how is it better now? Lots of times when a story isn't successful or isn't performing the way that you want it to be, it is solely because the storyteller was not like willing or able to be vulnerable. Your audience needs to be able to relate. Remember, they need to be able to overlay their own meaning onto the story that they're hearing. And so that means people have to be willing to share emotions that connect with others. And I'll talk more about this in a minute. But look for people, third, who can display emotion. Once again, this doesn't have to be like Rita, who was in tears her whole video. That worked for the purposes of that piece. But your storytellers just have to be able to make an emotional and real connection to your audience. So whether that's joy or laughter or tears or pride, whatever that emotion is, you want to make sure that you're finding people who can let down their walls, that's the vulnerability piece, and share that emotion with the world. And finally, this is the most important one when it comes to storytelling. If you are interacting with people, or if someone on your team is interacting with people and they think, I bet there's more to this person's story, that person is going to make a great storyteller. So think about people who you're curious about, who interact with your brand. They are going to be your best storytellers at the end of the day. If you're curious about them, your audience is probably going to be curious about them too. So these are the 4 things that you can take and arm yourself with as you're looking for people to tell your stories, or you can arm other people with as they're looking for people who can tell your stories on your behalf. But start adding anyone and everyone who you think could be a good fit to your list of storytellers. This, of course, is, kind of the outbound way of finding storytellers. You can also do a call for stories on your social media. And at the end of the day, though, this criteria is what will serve you well for really sifting through who may or may not be a good storyteller at the end of the day. Okay, so make a list. That's step 1. Step 2 of the story hunt process, now that you've had your list made, is conducting discovery interviews with every single person who you are considering using as a storyteller. This is our secret sauce. My goal today, I said at the beginning, is to be as practical as possible. So this is something that you can take and very easily do with any story that you're considering telling on behalf of your brand. And it also doesn't have to be your users, right? And it can be your teammates. It can be your leadership team. If you're a nonprofit, it can be your board members. Anyone can be a storyteller on your behalf. But no matter who they are, please, please, please always conduct discovery interviews with them. So let's talk about what they are and what they look like. A discovery interview is essentially a get to know you conversation with the people on your initial list. They are long, they're open-ended, they don't go too deep emotionally, but they help you uncover a lot of valuable information about your storytellers, and they give you the chance to understand the impact your organization has had on their lives, which is really, really cool. So once your list is created, reach out to these potential storytellers. As you're asking people to share their stories, I always like to insert this here. Managing expectations of how someone's story might be used is also really important. So we always say, instead of mentioning a specific project or initiative that you might be working on, just say that you're reaching out to gather stories of impact from your organization and you want to hear their story. Would they be willing to share? So this allows you the freedom to simply listen without wondering if you're going to hurt someone's feelings if you decide not to use their story in the end. Other quick logistics, we usually set aside an hour for a discovery interview. We plan to record conversations either in person or via Zoom. And that recording means you don't have to take notes, essentially. You can easily review what was said as you shape your story flows later. So discovery interviews, though, are really an amazing thing because they let you discover so many great things, not only about your storyteller, but also about your organization itself, which is really, really cool. So here are some things that you'll learn from discovery interviews. You'll learn, what is someone's story? Sometimes, I don't know if this has happened with you, but sometimes a story has been told time and time again. By the time it reaches you, it might be, it's like a game of telephone, right? It might be a little different than it actually is. So first and foremost, you'll learn whether or not someone actually has a story to tell and what it is. Next, this is probably the most important piece of the discovery interviews. You'll learn whether or not someone's story aligns with that initial anchor, that master plan. With Rita's story, oh gosh, when we went to Concordia College, there were so many amazing stories that we found through our discovery process, but they didn't necessarily fit with that one big idea that education changes lives. So as much as you may want to follow those other stories and tell them anyway, put them on a shelf for later use. You'll still be able to use them, just in a different way. And make sure what do I want to say here? Make sure that you stay true to what you set out to do in the first place. That's really key, is you're finding stories that are going to help you accomplish that master plan. So how does someone's story align with it? Next, the discovery interviews will help you learn whether or not someone can be emotionally vulnerable. In discovery interviews, we always say we are looking for hints of emotion. We're not taking people all the way down into them. So we're learning, we're discovering whether or not people are willing to go to those human vulnerable places that we talked about earlier. And then finally, the last piece is you're looking for people who have unique details to their story that an audience will connect with and remember. People still talk to me about Rita's story. It's old. And sometimes years later, I'll still have people come up to me and say, I remember her story. I remember that sewing factory. I remember how that person, her mentor, came to her graduation, and that stayed with me. So look for those unique details that an audience can hold on to, and those details where your audience's story might intersect with the storyteller's story. Those are the ones and the key pieces that you'll want to highlight in your stories. So your discovery interviews will allow you to walk away with all of these amazing things. And at the end of the day, they will ensure that your storytelling efforts are successful, which is the goal, right? You don't want to just throw a story at the wall and hope it sticks. Your audience over time will become disengaged. You want to make sure that your efforts are actually performing at the end of the day. So all of this intentionality will serve that. Okay, so that was step 2 of the story hunt. Before we jump into step 3, though, let's pause together and look at some questions you might ask during a discovery interview, because I want you to walk away with practical tools that you can use in your storytelling efforts. And this is a question I get regularly. What do I ask these people? Discovery questions are different from questions that you'll ask during an actual interview because the goal of a discovery interview is very different. With discovery interviews, the goal is in the name, right? It's discovery, discovery, discovery. You're learning what's there. So I'm just going to click all of these up on the screen really quick. There we go. You can ask people, just tell me your story in its broadest sense. And of course, your story their story as it relates to your brand. You're not just asking about their life story. But this will get people talking and you can see what is most important to them. If they're not going to emotional places on their own, don't be afraid to say, how did your story impact you emotionally? You can help them get there just by asking that question. What is something that you want people to know about your story is always a good one. This question is really key. I love this question because it gets those unique details that the audience will remember, that criteria that we talked about in the last section. This question will draw those out. It gets beneath the surface of what the events occurred were, and it gets into the heart of things, and it lets people put it into their own words. So you'll learn things that you didn't even know were there. So ask that question every single time. Don't forget to ask, of course, how your organization helped, how you were there, what would it have been like for them if you hadn't been there? What is, wait, what? Okay, I just got off track because I was looking down. Um, what does your journey mean to you? That's the last question I ask everyone. I ask it at the end of every discovery interview. I ask it at the end of every actual interview because this is what will wrap up your story. It will give it meaning and closure and hope, and it will be the why essentially to the what happened. And oftentimes just asking this question will give you some of your most profound responses. So if there isn't a deeper meaning, this is key too. If people can't express the deeper meaning, there isn't a story there for your organization to use. Okay, so let's review our story hunt so far. You've created your list. So you have a list of names of people who you think might be great. You've gone out into the world and you've conducted your discovery interviews with each of them. Now, how do you pick? How do you choose? I know some of you might be thinking, I probably won't have that problem. Maybe I'll get one person who might be okay. But honestly, as you start to build a culture that values storytelling within your organization, you are going to start having amazing stories to tell. I promise. And I hope a year from now, I hear from some of you and you're able to say, choosing my storyteller is my biggest problem because we have too many to count. So this is the final piece of the story hunt. It's selecting your storyteller. You've come back from your discovery interviews. How do you pick the person who will actually be the best? So when we went to Concordia College, Alabama, we came back with 25 potential storytellers. I think 10 of them would have been fantastic, and we had to pick 3. So this is the process that we work through with every organization, which actually I'm getting sidetracked a little in my mind because I just remembered when we went down to collect our discovery interviews, we actually did these ones in person. Lots of times we'll do them via Zoom, but we went down in person because we also wanted to see the campus. Their communications director, she was a lone ranger. Story finding was all up to her. She had to go out there into campus all on her own and find storytellers. But she had made it her mission probably for a year before we ever arrived to meet students, to go to the cafeteria and sit with them for lunch. This would be so intimidating to me. And she would just talk to them and she would say, "What's your story? Tell me about yourself. Who are you? What do you like?" So she'd meet them in the halls. She'd call them into her office. She would talk to teachers and to faculty and staff and say, "Who are you drawn to? Which students?" So really, a year before we ever arrived, she was creating a foundation of potential storytellers. She was making her list. So when we got there, she had this list of people who she thought would be fantastic. And the reality is, most of our discovery interviews were fantastic as a result of the groundwork that she had laid. But selecting the best storytellers really became a challenge because there were so many good ones as a result of her groundwork. So how do you select a storyteller? This is also a really systematic process. We take everyone through 2 rounds of what we call selects, which essentially just means picking the best person for the job. So picture yourself writing everyone's name on a whiteboard. So you are now going to systematically cross off names to select your best storyteller or storytellers if you're telling more than one story. But in the first round of selects, you are going to keep everyone's name on that whiteboard who first and foremost displayed warmth and emotion in their discovery interview, who possessed a natural storytelling ability. And then this one will feel familiar. You want to keep the names of people who you had a deep personal engagement with. Because remember, if you like the person, your audience is probably going to like them too. So we cross off anyone's name in this first round that doesn't fit that criteria. Usually, you're left with maybe half of the names on the list. I would say with Concordia, I think this is where we like cross from 25 down to 10. Usually that natural storytelling ability is one of those keys of, I love this person, but it takes a lot to really draw their story out, and they're probably not going to connect with our audience. So from there, it goes to round 2. And the first thing you're going to do in round 2 is you're going to go back to your foundation, your master plan. And you are going to overlay that master plan on anyone whose name is left on your list. And you're going to say, which storyteller will help us meet our goals? Who will our audience connect with the most? Who speaks best to our one big idea? And honestly, just with that, your front runners will emerge. So there is a second component here too. And that is, we always ask whether or not someone is emotionally healthy. And I don't have time to go into all of the details of what that means today, but essentially, you need to make sure they're ready to tell their story. If you grab a copy of my book, all of this is in there, all of the ways to know if someone's ready to share. But in short, you really want people to be empowered through the experience of telling their story, and you don't want it to be something that causes them harm in some way. Okay, before we finish out, I just want to show you a snippet of Rita's discovery interview. As you're watching this, really listen and look for the reasons that you might choose her based on the criteria that we just talked about. It's really rough quality because we just used our phones to record it, but I think it will still show you the gist of what a discovery interview looks like. Give me 1 second. Share. Rita. There she is. Okay. So yeah, college wasn't
No,
on your
no,
in your
no. I
eyesight.
was told in high school that I should not consider college by my counselor. There was a sewing factory in Monrovia, Vanity Fair.
Okay.
And my counselor told me to consider working at Vanity Fair and not consider going to college, even though I graduated in the top 10% of my class. That was not the encouragement there. So that's what I did when I graduated high school. Went to work at the sewing plant.
All right. That was her discovery interview. I'm going to finish this out quickly so that we have time for questions at the end. But Rita essentially. Whoops. Turn this off. See if we can hop forward. There we go. You can see this. I mean, she was chosen for her natural storytelling ability. You're just kind of drawn to her. You can see the expressions on her face. She was chosen for her warmth and emotion, of course. And then we had so much personal rapport together. And finally, of course, she aligned with the master plan, right? She could speak to the one big idea that education really changes lives. So I want to include just this one last clip to end our time together today. And this is not for myself at all, but it is for the purposes of showing how healing storytelling can be. We need each other, right? Your organization needs your storytellers, but your storytellers also need to be given the chance to tell their stories. So this is like the last thing I'm going to leave you with. Let me hop out of here. Share one more thing. It's real short.
Thank you. You don't know what you've done. You don't know what you've done for me. You just don't know.
Well, thank you for sharing.
Golly. You white people, I tell you, I know what I'm doing, Joe. I know what I'm doing, Joe. God. I'll just pull stuff out of people.
We've remained friends, which has been really cool. I love Rita. Okay, so wrapping everything up, let me skip forward ahead of that. Really, at the end of the day, you're giving people a gift by asking them to share their stories with you. And when they can talk about an experience with your product or service and use their story to give back in some way, that's just an incredible gift. So I want to end with one final stat. Neuroscientist Paul Zak, some of you might know him. He talks about how storytelling really triggers oxytocin, which is that feel-good hormone, which helps to build trust and emotional connections. And in his work, he has found that stories increase people's willingness to take action by 65 to 70%. And so think of how powerful this is for our sales and marketing efforts, where emotional connection often trumps logical reasoning, in influencing consumer behavior. This means you have to tell stories, but taking it a step further, you have to tell the right stories. You have to tell the ones that release that oxytocin and the stories that will ultimately unite your audience's emotions with your organization and create that bond. So tying it all together today, we looked at the power of story, creating a master plan, and how to go on a story hunt to find those right storytellers. So all of this is in my book if you're looking for a deeper dive. And here are, oh, I forgot about this. So we actually are offering for small giants only a discount on what is called our discovery package, where through January 31st, we're offering 20% off of doing 6 discovery interviews on your behalf, which basically takes the process of collecting stories off your plate. And our organization would provide you with 6 discovery interviews recorded on video, summaries of the interviews, pull quotes that you can use in social media, recommendations on how to use the newly found stories. And this discount, I think it saves at least $1,000 on the package. So you can access it by scanning the QR code. Last but not least, that's where I am on all the things. I know we only have a few minutes, but I would love to take any questions that we do have. I'll hop back to this.
Awesome. Thank you, Kristin. I think we're all inspired to go start our own story hunt now with these tools and really pull out some of those unfound emotions in maybe some of our customers or partners, even our employees. But we have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions. So does anyone have anything that'd be helpful to clarify, or you'd like to pick? Great question in the chat. Can you rename and throw and repeat those stats up here on top of things?
Yeah, that's Paul. I want to get it right. So let me look through my notes really quick. His stat. He's great, by the way. There's another great conference that's called the Nonprofit Storytelling Conference. It shouldn't be called nonprofit because it really is for any mission-driven organization to attend and learn from. He is a fellow speaker at that conference every year, and he does amazing research behind the power of story. So his stat is that there's a 65 to 70% increase in people's willingness to take action. I'm going to type it in when a story is told.
Thank you.
Yeah. And do you want me to speak to that LinkedIn question a little bit more? I know someone had sent that in ahead of time.
Great. Yeah, and if you don't mind on screen sharing so we can see you a
Yep.
little bit better.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
There we go.
perfect. Yeah, I would love that. Would be a great thing to dive into.
Okay. So I am not a LinkedIn expert, but a lot of what we talked about here today really does apply to LinkedIn as well. I mentioned some of this earlier as I was rabbit trailing, but that master plan applies to your work on social media as well. So you want to know your goals with what you're posting. You want to know what you hope to achieve. You want to make sure you know the audience and understand the audience that you want to reach. Who are they? What do they engage with? And then that one big idea that we talked about earlier really is key with LinkedIn. You also, this is just something I've observed. It's not something that's like gospel truth, but it's my understanding that you need to have a hook within the first 1 to 2 sentences that really grab your audience's attention when you post your stories. And within those 1 to 2 sentences, your audience, the people on LinkedIn who you're posting to, should be overlaying their own meaning onto your story right away. So one big idea, the big idea is clear within those first 2 sentences, and your audience can start relating to it instantly. So I work with an influencer who posts on LinkedIn. She's a LinkedIn influencer, which is kind of cool. And what's really crazy is her day job is building a sales pipeline for organizations all across the country, but she posts, and so, okay, she posts her tips and tricks regularly, and those get responses. But the posts that she receives the most engagement with are the ones where she tells a story about things like her food allergy or what life is like being a single mom. So I always say, don't be afraid to sprinkle some of your personal stuff in with the business tips and tricks as well. Be general, know your goals, know who you want to engage with, and every post should have a hook and a one big idea. So those are my LinkedIn tips and tricks. I have a faux pas with that really quick too, though, that I see regularly, and that is resist telling your own stories in someone else's comments. I feel like that really turns the table and makes their post all about you. And this is really a LinkedIn no-no too. So when you engage, find a point that you can thoughtfully respond to that they said, build that person up. And if you find yourself wanting to tell your own story, use that as inspiration for making your next post. So that's my LinkedIn advice with storytelling.
That's great advice. I see that on Threads all the time.
Yeah.
But awesome. Thank you so much, Kristin. I think we all got a lot out of this today. For those of you here, we will be sharing the slides and notes here in the next day or so. So you'll see the recap. Thank you all so much for joining us. I dropped in the chat our next 2 virtual events. We have some really good ones coming up. And every quarter we'll be doing community connections. So you can share and learn and get some support through the community there. And reminder, Summit is April 29th to May 1st. That's the best way to join our community. Thanks again. We'll see y'all next time. Have a great day.